Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining me for my regular updates from Washington. I've got 4 or 5 issues I want to cover on the front end, and then I'll turn it over to Laura, and we'll move to questions. The first issue is one that I think we all are still reeling from, and that is the spate of these brutal gun violence occurrences that have taken place not only in Texas or in Buffalo or in Tulsa, Oklahoma, but increasingly still across the country. I know there have been shootings even in the Commonwealth of Virginia over the last week or so. And my office is frankly being overwhelmed by Virginians begging for us to take action. This morning there were literally hundreds of young Virginians who were working with the group that came out of the Parkland shooting a number of years back, saying, please don't let one more of these tragedies take place. I think particularly about the Uvalde massacre, where 19 children, 2 teachers were brutally murdered with a weapon of war by someone who was clearly deranged. And my hope is, and prayer is, that this time we will do more than offer condolences that frankly ring false when we don't take any action. So I'm strongly in support of the bipartisan effort on addressing gun violence. It probably won't go as far as I'd like to go, but making progress, even a first small step at a national level, I think is extraordinarily important. What I wish we would do, and this is something that my dear friend Tim Kaine and I have proposed, is something called the Virginia Plan. Because in Virginia, when the legislature changed hands back in 2019, because elections really do matter, Virginia went ahead and passed a series of laws such as universal background checks, trying to make sure we have appropriate red flag laws, trying to make sure that guns are appropriately locked up when they're not in use, trying to make sure that we do appropriate other sensible gun action. And Tim Kaine and I have suggested that ought to be a model that we bring to the nation. I'm not sure what's being proposed on a bipartisan basis is going to get there, but simply doing nothing or hearing the absurd comments from, frankly, some of my Republican colleagues that say, well, you know, we need all these assault weapons because you got to hunt critters, or somehow saying if we could just change the dimensions of a door in a school building, that would somehow prevent these shootings. Those are frankly lies, and they don't address the seriousness of the tragedy that families in Texas, families in Buffalo, families in Virginia have to endure on a too often a basis. And I hope and pray we will see bipartisan action moving forward. I also wanted to cite one other on a challenging point, and I know I've raised this a number of times, but it is absolutely critical that the Senate and the House come together and pass the national investments, $52 billion in production in America of semiconductor chips. We have one of these facilities in Virginia already at the Micron facility in Prince William County in Manassas. My hope is when we pass this legislation, we could obtain additional of these huge manufacturing facilities in Virginia. This is a national security issue. I can assure you China is racing to try to build these facilities and potentially cut off the absolutely critical supply of chips that go into any kind of device that has an on and off button. And as we think about more and more connected devices, that simply adds the number of chips that are in our systems, and we need to make sure that we maintain in America domestic manufacturing, production, and the continued research and develop to maintain our national and international lead in microprocessors. I'm on the conference committee, but the clock is ticking as these companies are starting to make decisions not to invest in America, but invest elsewhere around the world because other countries are stepping up to the plate. So that is one of my top legislative agenda items right now. It's not a high-profile piece of legislation, but it is extraordinarily important for our security, jobs, and candidly, if we're going to start to bring down inflation on items like cars, where we can't get them into the marketplace because there is such a lack of semiconductor chips. On a more positive note, let me talk about three pieces of legislation, or three action items. First, we made an announcement yesterday of something that I've been literally working on since I was governor, and that is trying to make sure we have enough funding available to bring high-speed, affordable internet broadband to every household in Virginia. Yesterday, there was an announcement that Virginia was going to receive $220 million out of a program that I helped put into law, a $10 billion program administered by the Department of Treasury, to help provide that affordable high-speed broadband. And when I say high-speed, I mean 100 down and 20 up for those of you who are techies on the call. This $220 million will go along with what former Governor Northam put in the budget out of what was called the American Rescue Plan, about $480 million, putting together this funds with those other funds, a $700 million commitment by the Commonwealth of Virginia. And I'm happy to see that Governor Youngkin and the legislature didn't mess with that and are going to continue that. We've got to make sure that broadband, which is not a nice to have, but as we all have seen from COVID, an economic necessity, particularly for our rural communities. Getting broadband doesn't guarantee them success, but if you don't have broadband, your ability for particularly rural communities to compete in this global economy really disappears. So this is Virginia was one of the first states awarded these funds, combined with what has already come from the ARP, and there's another $65 billion, literally for both affordability and build out on a national basis, that will come out of the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which again, I was proud to be one of the authors of. So again, no excuse for why every household in Virginia by 2024, 2025 should not have affordable high-speed broadband to their home. Another issue that actually hasn't gotten a lot of attention but is extraordinarily important for Virginia was named the PACT Act, and that is a bill to make sure that we honor our commitment to our veterans. Virginia has the highest per capita number of veterans of any state in the country, and obviously with the base in Hampton Roads, with the Pentagon, and Quantico in Northern Virginia, and a number of military installations around the Commonwealth, many of our active duty service men and women decide to stay in Virginia after the fact. This PACT Act, which got over 80 votes in the Senate on its first test vote, will do a number of things. It will increase and make record investments in, for example, IT infrastructure at the VA. VA still got a lot of challenges on getting our veterans into the services that they need, terribly important. It was also build out a series of additional facilities. So we've been in process of building out a major new facility for our vets in the Fredericksburg area and one in Southampton Roads. This will actually build another facility in Southampton Roads in the late 20s, and it will make sure that particularly those veterans who have been hurt in burn pits or Agent Orange get the kind of long-term commitment on having those injuries taken care of by the VA. So that's terribly important. There's also additional provision for widows and of our vets. This will get passed, a very important piece of legislation and really significant to honor our commitment to veterans across Virginia and across the country. And then finally, I wanted to raise an issue that, again, Senator Kaine and I have been working on, and this is the puppy testing center in Cumberland, Virginia, managed by a company called Envigo. Envigo is a bad actor. They have had over 70 different incidents of, frankly, mistreating and maltreating these puppies. Thank God the Department of Justice has come in and taken over this investigation. We've already been able to rescue 450 puppies. Most of these are beagle pups that were used in experimentation. 450 of those pups have been rescued and hopefully are going to be on the path towards getting the kind of home and love that they deserve. I say this as a dog owner. I've had dogs throughout my life, and my three daughters have all grown up with dogs in our household. My dog Finn, I couldn't imagine when he was a puppy enduring the kind of awful treatment that is that's gone on at this facility. And candidly, we need to hold Envigo to the full extent of the law. There's close to another 3,600 dogs that are still in their custody, and we need to get to the bottom of making sure those dogs, and literally these are puppies, are kept safe. So awful that it took place, but I'm glad that Tim Kaine and I are making sure that this company, a bad news actor, gets held accountable. So with that as kind of some opening comments, why don't I turn it over to Laura and be happy to take your questions.
Our first question will be Ian Munro with the Virginia Pilot.
Hey, good morning, Senator. So I know you spoke about the PACT Act here, but can you tell me a little bit about if you expect any pushback as the bill proceeds? Again, I mean, you're saying it's over 80 votes in that sort of test vote. Do you foresee any larger issues, or out of those key points you mentioned, something getting knocked out in that process of getting it across the line?
Well, let me make clear, this is, a major investment in terms of the CBO scoring. Its costs are roughly, I think, about $275 billion over 10 years. Now that's less than what the House passed, so I do think the Senate, led by Senator Tester from Montana, has kind of found ways to cut back the costs. I imagine some of the usual suspects will try to throw a monkey wrench into this, but when you've got 80 votes, we will get it done. I don't envision any major component falling out. There are a number of other parts beyond. Again, this has been a lot focused on burn pits, Agent Orange, trying to make sure that we honor our commitment to the vets on an ongoing basis. Sometimes these injuries take literally years to manifest, and making sure as well that if a vet loses their life, that their survivors get these benefits as well. It also has taken on other long-term institutional issues, upgrading the IT systems. I remember, whether it was at Hampton or a facility in Salem, particularly the facility in Salem, going and seeing literally a phone system that was 20 plus years old, and people wondered why it took, you got put on hold for sometimes hours on end. That kind of basic customer-facing service needs to improve at the VA if we're going to give the level and quality of care that our vets deserve. So I think this will get done, and again, for Southampton Roads at least, while we're still in the process of getting open the facility that's literally been 5 or 6 years in the making, that will take off some of the pressure from Hampton and provide I think it's a couple 100,000 square foot facility on the south side. Really, really important. This also, because Hampton Roads has got one of the fastest growing vet populations in the whole country, it will provide another facility that will probably be open in the late 2020s. So I think, Ian, overall, I feel pretty darn good about the fact that this will get through without major surgery.
Our next question will be with Hannah Brandt, Nexstar.
Hi, Senator Warner. Thanks for taking my question. So you kind of touched on this, but I wanted to dig a little bit deeper. Republicans are supportive in the wake of these shootings of better security for schools. They keep saying, hardening our schools, measures for better training for school security officers, and mental health. I know, you're in favor of more broad gun control, but if these specific proposals were put forward, are those things you would support as well?
Well, I think what's going to come out of this bipartisan package will be some additional resources, probably for school resource officers or others. But as we saw in the shooting at the school in Texas, there was a school resource officer. So I'm not sure that's going to stop somebody with a deranged person with an AR-15 weapon of war. Should we do more mental health? Absolutely. This is a problem that cannot just be solved with gun control legislation only. There's a mental health component. We need to do much more. The red flag laws that we passed in Virginia, I think, should be, again, a national model, closing down the boyfriend loophole so that there are certain challenges. If you threaten someone, not getting a firearm, but somehow if you were in a non-marital relationship, there was an exemption. So I'm anxious to see what's happening. But when frankly, I'm embarrassed though when some senators stand on the floor and simply say, if we could change the dimensions of the school door, that's going to prevent these tragedies from taking place. I don't even know if they, in their hearts, believe it. So I'm tired of some of the pious statements from say they want to send thoughts and prayers and then don't want to do anything. And I'm just hopeful that this time it will be different, because America's patience with failing to do anything. We are the only industrial country in the world that has these kind of brutal murders and killings on a regular basis. And I just hope and pray we are a better country than this, but we've got to rise to the occasion. I'll do my part, and I'm just hoping that we'll get over 60 votes. And I'm sure what is coming forward is not going to be as far as I'd want to go, but I think it's important that we take that first step.
Our next question will be Mike Allen, the Roanoke Times. Mike.
Hello, Senator. Thank you for taking my question. I am interested in hearing if you could describe if you could elaborate more on the areas of agreement and disagreement right now with both the gun control legislation potentially and the semiconductor bill, which, as you know, I'm very interested in. So, sorry to make one question actually.
No, Mike. Let me just on the gun control legislation. These negotiations are in another gang, and again, as somebody that's normally a member of every bipartisan gang, I volunteer, but it was good to have some members that were not some of the usual suspects, both Republicans and Democrats. So I'm, not more aware of what is specifically in or out any more than what's in the already in the public domain. I do know that Chris Murphy, who is taking the lead on the Democratic side, who lived through and he was a member of Congress when Sandy Hook took place a number of years back, and again, young school children brutally murdered. Clearly, he'd like to go further, but I think most of us in the Democratic caucus have said, hey, get what you can. Let's show the country that we can at least take a step, and let's show the country as well and show our Republican friends who will have the courage to step up that the vast majority of Americans are with them. I was really proud to see so many gun owners and conservatives in Texas send a letter to Senator John Cornyn. And I work with Senator Cornyn a whole lot. Matter of fact, he is my partner on the CHIPS legislation. So specifics on guns, I'll leave to the working group. On CHIPS, this is one I will give you just the top line, because I could go way too deep. There is general agreement on the need for the United States to invest the $52 billion into building semiconductor facilities here in this country and continue to do the research and development, so we have the tools and the equipment that goes inside those factories. We continue to invest in research on cutting-edge semiconductor chips. The truth is, right now, almost all of these cutting-edge semiconductor chips are made in Taiwan. And when we see the possibilities of President Xi and China threatening Taiwan, not only would that be awful for Taiwan, but what it would do to the world's economy if somehow China captured Taiwan with its semiconductor capacity, it would be devastating to the world economy. There is commitment on that $52 billion. There's a series of other research components that are not fully funded in the bill. And my hope is that, again, in Virginia, and frankly, we are promoting an effort in Southwest Virginia to get one of these research and development centers. Frankly, the House put a series of items in the bill that are, I might agree with, but chances are never going to get passed in the Senate around the environment that, frankly, aren't related to the main topic. There are some challenges around making sure that we do some reforms on Trade Adjustment Act. So that if somebody loses the job due to trade, what kind of benefits do they get to get trained for a new job? Frankly, that program needs reform. I saw after we lost so many textile jobs in Southside Virginia when I was governor, We gave out a TAA, but people were not, frankly, didn't get training for jobs that actually existed at that moment in time. So there's a host of other areas. The challenge, right, partially is, Mike, is there's over 100 people put on the conference committee. I'm proud to be a member of the conference committee, but it's frankly not that much of a distinction when you've got this many people on it. And it's a little bit like herding cats, and I'm trying to force discussions around some of these tax issues, around some of these, and just make sure that the momentum doesn't wane. Because as a former business guy, I'm hearing from the companies that if they can't know with certainty that America is going to meet its commitment, this national security, this jobs, this inflation cutting commitment, then they're going to decide to move elsewhere. I think about European bureaucracy as kind of quintessential bureaucracy, but when the Europeans move quicker than us, and Intel's got a commitment from $8 billion from the German government to build a facility at least as big, if not bigger, than what Intel's announced in Ohio, we ought to recognize that time is not on our side. And that's what I've got to try to convince my colleagues on both sides. Just getting it done is not the only goal, because we are in a global economic competition. And whether it be China or whether it be other nations, some of them who are allies, who are literally making, on a per capita basis, higher investments than we are, we're going to lose out some of these opportunities. So I am pushing like mad. I was out in California last week and talked to some of the semiconductor industry to kind of bring full pressure to bear, and I hope to have more to report next week. Sorry for the long answer.
Our next question will be Dean Mershahi with WRIC.
Hi, Senator. Thanks for the time. Americans are paying nearly $2 more per gallon at this point compared to last year. Obviously, these record prices are a global issue brought on by several factors, as we know. But a lot of focus has been made on the response from elected officials, especially the Biden administration. Biden has taken some steps. He's released oil reserves. He's invoked the Defense Production Act, but he's also called on Congress to pass legislation to impose fees on companies that don't take advantage of the leases, allowing them to get oil from federal land, make the U.S. less dependent on these imports, and ease the impact of these price changes. And I know Republicans are pushing for expanding oil drilling, and they've criticized Biden for shutting down the Keystone Pipeline. I'm just wondering, what moves do you personally support and think should be made to respond to these record prices, and what viable options Congress has?
Great question, and let me go through this. I mean, first of all, questions around inflation are top on every Virginian, every American's mind at this point. And what's happening with inflation is not just happening in America, it's happening all around the world. And as a Monday morning quarterback, I think most of us would say we wish the Federal Reserve Bank had actually started to raise interest rates a little bit earlier than they did this past spring. I called for them to raise those rates last year. Now, that many economists are starting to see inflation has peaked, but we're clearly not feeling that right now at the pump. And raising inflation rates is one of the reasons why we've seen a dramatic decline in the stock market. So none of this comes easy, and it is a little bit self-serving to sit here as a Monday morning quarterback and say the Fed should have raised rates last year. I did call for that, but a lot of folks didn't mind when they saw their stock portfolios going up, up, up. That's one of the most important tools we have. The question, and I'm not normally a business basher, but I do think if you look back over the last couple of years when the global price of oil was $20, $30, $40 higher than it is today, yet gasoline prices didn't get to these same new record heights, I think all Americans ought to ask the question, well, if oil was $160, $170 a barrel a few years back, but it didn't get to close to $5 a gallon gas prices, what has changed? other than the fact that I think some of these oil companies are making record profits. And much of the production, candidly, a lot of the energy industry shut down production in the early days of COVID and have not increased that production. So I do think we at least ought to get some more transparency from these companies. And if there's price gouging going on, they ought to be held accountable. Third thing is, though, and this is related to overall energy prices, not just gasoline prices. I think one of the most important things we could do to grapple with rising energy costs, to also make sure on a national security basis, and frankly, to even start to decarbonize not just our economy but the global economy, is to increase American production of natural gas, as long as we put appropriate restrictions on methane emissions. If we increase American natural gas, we will help bring down energy prices across the board. We will end up providing Europe with a more secure supply of energy than relying on Russian gas and oil. And I'm glad to see the Europeans have moved on Russian oil, but they've not moved on Russian gas. We got to get them a source. And frankly, if you look at how America has actually dealt with climate change, there's a lot of things we need to improve on. But in terms of actually CO2 emissions, we've done better than some of our European friends who promise more because we've had this natural gas. And too often, it doesn't make total sense to me. And this is something I've spent a lot of time looking at over the last year. And frankly, getting further educated, if we're buying solar panels from China that are produced by coal-driven energy, I'm not sure that net helps the economy that much. If we can get, as a transition fuel, more countries turning to natural gas as a transition till solar, wind, and frankly nuclear come more online, as long as we can have that American natural gas without methane emissions, that's an area where I agree with my Republican friends, I agree with Joe Manchin, and I think there's a case to be made right now for both inflationary reasons, national security reasons, and frankly, decarbonizing our global economy, because if we act alone, and yet China and India, South America and Africa don't act, we're still going to have a global, it's why it's called global climate change, we're going to have global warming that is going to dramatically affect all our lives. So that also is something that would go straight at the heart of energy prices on a not just national but global basis.
Question will be with Isabel Cleary, NBC 29. Isabel? Okay, we're going to move on to Mia Nelson, WSET, and I want to remind everyone to please mute your microphone after you're finished asking a question. Mia Nelson?
Hello? Can you hear me now?
That sounds like my voice. I'm not sure. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Question for you. Considering the recent gun violence occurrences in our nation, what are your thoughts on Governor Youngkin's plans to put school resource officers in all schools in Virginia?
I would be supportive, but it's not sufficient. I mean, there was a school resource officer in Uvalde, Texas. Didn't stop the brutal murder of 19 children and 2 teachers. We need to do all of the above, whether it's school resource officers, mental health, additional support, red flag laws. But I can't believe anyone could look at the families of these people murdered in Texas, or the families of the people murdered in Buffalo, and somehow say that guns didn't play a role. It doesn't pass the smell test. And one of the things that I'm also looking at, and I would like to see if I could include in this, is a targeted reform of what's called Section 230, because clearly, particularly in the case in Buffalo, where some of these 18, 19, 20-year-olds with these weapons of war had been radicalized on the internet, it is another one of the source of this kind of brutal murders. And Section 230 is basically a get out of jail free card for Facebook and all of the other social media platforms, where they bear no responsibility for the kind of garbage that's put out. For example, in the case in Buffalo, that turned this young man into going out and killing a bunch of fellow Americans simply because they were black, all based on some crazy replacement theory that was completely foisted upon him over the internet. To have no responsibility for that kind of hateful, awful, vile, I think is not right. I think you can protect your First Amendment rights. I strongly believe in that. But the ability to have, racist, bigoted propaganda put out and amplified 4 billion times as it is on Facebook, I think that goes too far. And I think there are some narrow exemptions I'm trying to work with this bipartisan coalition on.
We are going to move on to Carly Haynes with CBS 19. Carly?
Senator, a bit of a different question here. We found that you secured a federal grant for the African American Heritage Center here in Charlottesville. What do you hope that grant accomplishes, and why did you do that?
Well, I think this grant, which around $100,000, which will go to looking at the historic and the property records in the greater Charlottesville area and the contribution that African Americans have made to Central Virginia's history and heritage. I think it's really important that we tell the whole story, good, bad, and ugly, of Virginia's history, of the contributions that all kinds of Virginians have made. I think that is a step forward. I also think, and when we think about it, there are a lot of things we need to do to improve on making America more like what the words in our Declaration and Constitution put forward. But I also, and this is the one topic we've not touched on so far, but as we see, one of the things I think we've all been questioning, we're talking about gun control and we're talking about some of the other issues, and the last few years with political dysfunction, with January 6th, those hearings starting tomorrow night, with COVID, I mean, it's been a hard time. And I think there's been probably some of us who said, well, gosh, can the idea of our ideas of democracy, freedom to vote, freedom of the press, right to agree and disagree, is that system going to stand the test of time? And one of the things that we're seeing play out right now on the global stage with the people of Ukraine standing up against the authoritarian regime and say, we will vote with our lives to try to have what you have in America and take for granted every day. I hope we realize, again, we are the good guys. We are, our system is the best. Are there ways that we need to improve, particularly in terms of some of the racist tendencies that have taken place in our country and in Virginia in the past, and to some degree still exist in certain areas? Absolutely. But this is a system worth fighting for and a system worth defending. And what I hope this grant provides for the greater Charlottesville community is a little bit more of the history, particularly of the contributions that African Americans have made literally over the decades and over the centuries to Virginia and to America.
We're going to jump back to Isabel Cleary with WIRC.
Hi, Senator. Can you hear me this time?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. My question is, going back to the gun violence legislation, will there be an aspect of mental health that you think will be passed in the legislation that you'll be voting on? And when do you expect a vote to take place?
I think there is, and I don't have the exact dimensions, but I do know there has been agreement that in any package that comes forward, mental health has to be a component. And I think we need to acknowledge that, particularly coming out of post-COVID, and we need mental health assistance to make sure that we prevent these tragic shootings. But quite honestly, I'm not sure there's a family in Virginia post-COVID that somewhere in their family doesn't have some additional mental health needs. And this is an area, whether we think about our kids that didn't get to go to school for a period of time, when we've had lives disrupted by COVID, I can't think of a better investment that we need to make than increasing mental health services. Obviously, the legislation will target those extraordinary extreme cases where people are being radicalized or people are feeling like their only way to act out is to go out and buy an assault weapon and brutally murder people. Mental health earlier intervention will help in some of those cases. It may not solve every problem, but I do think there will be that will be in the package. Now, when that package gets to the floor, having been involved in virtually every bipartisan negotiation in the last 10 years, in the Senate. These things always take longer than we'd like. We were hoping there'd be a deal announced this week. It may go into next week, but I do think the pressure is on. And one of the things that I don't want to do is, in an effort to just kind of rush to the floor and vote on an item, I want to give particularly my Republican colleagues, those who are working in good faith, the time to get to something not only they can vote for, but they can recruit additional Republican senators. So far, I think there's only been 7 Republican senators engaged in these conversations. Remember, you got to get to 10 and Republican senators, and frankly, I know from these conversations, nobody wants to be that 10th vote, so I think a lot of my Republican colleagues would much rather see if they could get 15 or 20 of their Republican colleagues to go along with them. So I'm going to give them a little more time. But mental health will be part of the package.
Our last question will be with Amy Knowles, the Virginia Dogwood.
Hey, Senator Warner, thanks for taking our questions. We're still hearing a lot of buzz about the Virginia budget, with hints that Governor Youngkin may make some amendments. In your opinion, is that necessary, or would it be beneficial to sign as is?
Well, Amy, having sat in that chair in the past and had the opportunity, we've got kind of an interesting system in Virginia for those of you who may not be Virginia budget nerds. The governor amends the budget. The legislature comes back and agrees or disagrees, but then after the legislature leaves, the governor can still make changes or tinker. Now, oftentimes taking things out, you can't necessarily put more things in. And, I think the legislature reached a good compromise, but I am not going to, I want to give the governor, this is his first budget. I want to give him the space to do what he thinks is right. If I disagree, I may call out later, but I'm not going to, preemptively suggest what he should do. I've sat in that chair. It is it's an awesome responsibility to try to get things right for the people of Virginia. I was proud that I was able to do it in a way that I had a 2-to-1 Republican legislature, so everything I did had to be done in a bipartisan fashion, and doing that in a bipartisan fashion earned Virginia recognition as the best managed state, the best state for business, and the best state to receive a public education from preschool to graduate school. And that was only done because we worked in a bipartisan way. So, Amy, you gave me that opening. I couldn't help but reiterating, for those of you who are new press corps members, if you have to deal with me in the future, you'll probably only hear that a few dozen times over the coming years. But so I'll leave it at that, Amy.